You could feel the weight of him the moment you picked him up. He was heavy, not like the plastic things on the shelf next to him. He was dense, solid, built like he meant it. 12 inches tall, with 21 moving joints, a scar on his right cheek, and a uniform made of real cloth with real buttons that your fingers fumbled over because you were 6 and buttons were hard. He came with dog tags. He came with boots that laced. He came in a box that showed him storming a beach or jumping from a plane, and the second you got him out of that box, he was yours. He was the first action figure ever made. His name was G.I. Joe. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you are watching from. Nobody had ever seen anything like him. Before G.I. Joe, boys had tin soldiers that stood in rows and did nothing. They had plastic army men that you set up on the carpet and knocked down with marbles. But nothing moved, nothing bent. Nothing wore real clothes that you could take off and put on and change depending on the mission. G.I. Joe had arms that bent at the elbow, and legs that bent at the knee, and a head that turned, and a waist that twisted, and every joint clicked into place with the sound you can still hear right now if you close your eyes. 21 clicks, 21 possibilities, 21 ways to make him stand or kneel or crawl or aim or salute. Nobody called him a doll. Hasbro made sure of that. They invented a new word for him, action figure, because boys do not play with dolls. Boys play with action figures, and that word did not exist until G.I. Joe made it necessary. He had a scar on his right cheek. You noticed it the first time you held him. A thin line running down his face, like he had been somewhere before you got him, like he had already fought a battle you would never know about. The truth was stranger. Hasbro put the scar there because you cannot trademark the human body, but you can trademark a scar. It was an anti-counterfeiting measure, but you did not know that. You just knew your Joe had been through something. He had a story before you even started telling one. Your father understood him in a way your mother did not. Your father had served, or your uncle had, or your grandfather, somebody in your family had worn the uniform, and when they saw G.I. Joe in his Class A's with the correct insignia and the proper rank, they nodded. Because Hasbro had done the research. They consulted military manuals. They got the details right. The cut of the jacket, the placement of the buttons, the shape of the helmet. The men who designed him were veterans themselves, Korean War men who knew what a real uniform looked like and would not accept anything less. When your father handed you a G.I. Joe on Christmas morning, he was not just giving you a toy. He was giving you a piece of something he understood, something real. You dressed him. That was the ritual. He came in basic fatigues, but the outfits were sold separately. Soldier, sailor, marine, pilot, and each one came in its own package with every piece you needed. The dress uniform with the medals, the combat gear with the helmet and the field pack, the navy whites with the cap, the pilot's flight suit with the goggles. You saved your allowance. You circled the ones you wanted in the Sears catalog and left it open on the kitchen counter where your mother would see it. And every birthday, every Christmas, every report card that earned you a trip to the store, G.I. Joe's wardrobe grew. The Sears catalog was your Bible. You didn't just circle items, you studied them. You turned the pages slowly, comparing the deep-sea diver set to the mountain troop set, weighing the astronaut suit against the military police uniform, calculating which one gave you the most gear for the money. You dog-eared the pages. You folded down corners. You wrote your name next to the ones you wanted most, as if claiming them would make them yours faster. Some years the Sears had exclusive sets you couldn't find anywhere else, special combinations of gear and weapons that no other store carried. If your town had a Sears, you went in and stood at the counter and looked at the boxes and made your decision like a general choosing his equipment for the next campaign. If your town didn't have a Sears, you ordered from the catalog and waited by the mailbox for days. You kept everything in the Footlocker, the wooden box with the lift-out tray that smelled like cedar and closed with a metal clasp that snapped shut with a sound that meant the mission was over and everything was accounted for. You organized it. The uniforms on one side, the weapons on the other, the boots paired together at the bottom. Some of you labeled the tray. Some of you had a system that nobody else understood, but that made perfect sense to you. Opening that Footlocker was the start of every mission. Closing it was the end. And the smell, the cedar, the plastic, the faint chemical scent of the uniform dye is something you can still recall 50 years later if someone says the words. The Jeep was the vehicle every kid wanted. It had a working winch on the front, a real cable that wound around a spool and could pull things. You attached it to a rock in the backyard, and Joe pulled himself forward like he was clearing a road in France. The detail on that Jeep was something that no toy manufacturer would bother with today. A windshield that folded down, a spare tire on the back, a steering wheel that turned. You drove Joe through the mud in the garden, across the sandbox, through puddles that your mother would have stopped you from touching if she'd known. Joe got dirty, his uniform got wet, his boots turned brown with real dirt, and that was the whole point. He wasn't meant for the shelf, he was meant for the field. By 1965, the line had expanded beyond anything Hasbro imagined. $16 million the first year, $36 million the second. A company that had started as a pencil maker in Providence, Rhode Island, the Hassenfeld brothers, making school supplies and pencil boxes, was now the hottest toy company in America because of a 12-inch man with a scar on his cheek. The man who invented him never saw a penny of those millions. Stanley Weston, the Manhattan licensing agent who walked into Hasbro's office with a prototype and a dream, had sold the entire concept for a flat $100,000. No royalties, no percentage, no back end, $100,000 for what would become the most successful action figure in history. It's one of the most expensive handshakes in the toy business. But Weston walked away satisfied, and the truth is, without him, there would have been no G.I. Joe, no action figure, no word for it, no aisle in the toy store dedicated to it. They introduced an African-American G.I. Joe, not as an afterthought, not as a gimmick, but as another soldier who wore the same uniform and carried the same gear. They introduced soldiers of the world, a German, a Japanese, a Russian, a French, a British, an Australian, each with historically accurate uniforms. They introduced the talking commander with a pull string that barked out orders in a voice that sounded like every drill sergeant your father had ever told you about. The accessories filled entire pages of the Sears catalog, and every boy in America spent hours studying those pages like they were military intelligence. And then Vietnam happened, not to G.I. Joe, to America. By 1968, the war had turned ugly in the living rooms of the country, and parents who had been happy to buy their sons a toy soldier were suddenly uncomfortable with anything that looked like combat. Sales collapsed. The uniform that had once represented everything good about service now reminded people of body bags and protests and Walter Cronkite saying the war could not be won. Hasbro had a choice: let Joe die or change him. They changed him. In 1970, G.I. Joe became the adventure team. The fatigues were replaced by jumpsuits. The rifles were replaced by grappling hooks, diving gear, and jungle machetes. The enemies were no longer soldiers. They were pythons, sharks, mummies, and volcanic eruptions. Joe grew a beard. His hair became soft and flocked instead of molded plastic. He looked less like a soldier and more like a man who climbed mountains, explored caves, and rescued people from avalanches. And the kids loved it. The adventure team sold even better than the original military line. Because the truth was, boys didn't need Joe to fight a war. They needed Joe to go on an adventure. And the adventures he could go on were limited only by the backyard and the imagination. Your friend had the sea adventurer. You had the land adventurer. The kid across the street had man of action, the one with the AT logo on his chest and the beard that made him look like someone's cool uncle who had been everywhere and seen everything. You met in someone's backyard, and the mission began. The garden hose was a river, the hedge was a jungle, the sandbox was a desert, and three 12-inch men with flocked beards and rubber hands went in together and came out covered in dirt and grass and whatever your mother was going to yell about when she saw the state of those uniforms. Those were the best afternoons of your childhood, and you know it. The Kung Fu grip came in 1974, and if you were a kid in the 70s, those three words just hit you somewhere deep. His hands were made of a softer rubber that could actually wrap around objects and hold them. He could grip a rope, he could hold a flashlight, he could grab the edge of a cliff, which was really the edge of your desk, but it was a cliff to you, and it was a cliff to Joe. And the Kung Fu grip was the difference between life and death on that mission. The name alone sold millions. Every kid wanted the Kung Fu grip. Every kid squeezed those rubber fingers around something and felt like Joe had just leveled up. Then came Mike Power, the Atomic Man, Hasbro's answer to the $6 million man. One arm was transparent plastic so you could see the bionic mechanisms inside. He had a helicopter blade on his arm that actually spun. In 1976, they gave Joe Eagle eyes, a tiny lever on the back of his neck that moved his eyes left and right. You could make him look around a corner. You could make him scan a room. A toy whose eyes moved. In 1976, that was close to sorcery. Every new feature they added was Hasbro saying, "This is not a doll. This is a man. A man who can grip things and see things and do things that no other toy on the shelf can do." And every time they added something, you needed it. Not wanted, needed. Star Wars killed him, not with a lightsaber, but with mathematics. In 1977, Kenner released tiny Star Wars figures 3 3/4 inches tall, plastic, no real clothes, no moving joints worth mentioning. But they cost $2 instead of $12. A kid could own an entire army for the price of one G.I. Joe outfit. The 12-inch format, the format that Joe had invented and owned for 14 years, was suddenly too big, too expensive, too slow for a market that wanted small, cheap, and collectible. Hasbro tried to compete with Super Joe, an 8-inch sci-fi figure that nobody remembers because it deserved to be forgotten. By 1978, the 12-inch G.I. Joe was gone. 14 years, done. 4 years later, Hasbro brought back the name, but not the man. The new G.I. Joe was 3 3/4 inches tall. He was plastic. He wore painted-on clothes. He came with a cartoon show and a storyline and a villain named Cobra Commander who would have been laughed off the original Joe's Jeep. The new Joe was a franchise. The original Joe was a toy. And the difference between those two things is everything. What most Americans do not know is that G.I. Joe never died everywhere. In England, Palitoy had licensed the original 12-inch figure and sold him as Action Man, and Action Man was bigger in Europe than G.I. Joe ever was in America. British kids, French kids, German kids played with the same 12-inch figure, the same cloth uniforms, the same working accessories, long after American kids had moved on to 3-inch plastic. The rest of the world kept the original alive for years, as if they understood something about the weight and the cloth and the 21 joints that America had forgotten. If you still have yours, you know. The rubber of the Kung Fu grip has hardened and cracked. The flocked hair has rubbed off in patches. The fatigues are faded. The Footlocker is in a box in the attic with the tray still inside and a few dog tags rattling around the bottom. He's up there right now, in the dark, with his scar on his cheek and his 21 joints, locked in whatever position you left him in the last time you played with him. 45 years ago, maybe 50, you stopped playing with him the way you stopped believing in Santa Claus, not with a decision, but with a drift. One day, he was in the middle of your bedroom floor, mid-mission, covered in backyard mud. The next month, he was on the shelf. The month after that, he was in the closet, and then one afternoon, your mother put him in a box, and you didn't stop her, because you were 13 and you had other things on your mind, and Joe was just a toy, and you were done with toys. Except you weren't done. You never were. You just didn't know it yet. But you remember the weight of him. That's what comes back first. Not the accessories, not the Jeep, not the catalog pages. The weight. The solid, heavy, unmistakable feel of picking up something that was built to be held by a boy and taken to war. Real war, imaginary war, backyard war, living room war. Any war worth fighting on a Saturday afternoon when the whole world fit between the couch and the kitchen door. 20 years later, or 30 or 40, you saw one at a flea market, or an antique mall, or in your mother's basement when you were cleaning it out after she moved to the smaller place. And you picked him up, and the weight was exactly the same. Your hand remembered before your brain did. The heft of him, the density, the solidity of something made in America in 1964, when toys were built to survive a childhood and not just a Saturday. You turned him over, and there it was, the scar, still on the right cheek, still telling a story you never wrote, and something in your chest tightened because you were holding your own childhood in one hand, and it weighed exactly what you remembered. They still make something called G.I. Joe. It's 3 inches tall, it's plastic, it has no clothes, no Footlocker, no weight. It is not G.I. Joe, not yours, not the one with the scar, and the boots that laced, and the uniform that buttoned, and the joints that clicked 21 times when you posed him just right. That Joe is gone. The first action figure ever made, and the last one that ever felt real. If the original 12-inch G.I. Joe was part of your childhood, tell us in the comments. Which branch was your first? Soldier, sailor, marine, or pilot?